Hello, hello. Oops, that's not loud enough. Hello. Hmm. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Oop. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tales of Our Times. This is a show where we discuss the stories that move us, what makes them so meaningful, and why I wish I had more coffee. Now I'm just trying to make sure that I can take off all of my bangles. But otherwise it looks good. So today just me. We're going to do some question answers and kind of try to get back to you guys. A way to say thank you to you for all of your support. And another way, I guess, to test how ready I am to do solo introductions. So let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tales of Our Times. This is a show where we discuss the stories that move us, what makes them so interesting, and why others could or should find meaning in them as well. Where there's a story, there's a reason to read. And this last April, we officially turned 1 year old. So first of all, a huge thanks to everybody out there who listened in our first year. This has been a really exciting project for me, and I hope that it has kind of like taught you guys a lot, or at least given you an opportunity to engage with stories that you might have otherwise missed, which was one of my goals. But as some long-term listeners have probably heard, I've become a full-time member of Radio Taiwan International in the time that I've been doing this show. So to celebrate both of these things, I thought it would be appropriate to have another Takes episode. This time, however, instead of deep diving into a topic about literature, we're doing a Mailbag episode. I'm taking a look at questions I received from friends, listeners, RTI fans, as well as some FAQs, and answering them to the best of my ability. And then next week, we'll be back to our regular formatting. But this week is just kind of a check-in with me, a check-in with you guys, to answer your questions you may have had about the show, about me as a host, and about kind of the stories and episodes that we've done so far in this past year. So without further ado, let's get into it. The topics we'll be covering today include production of the podcast, a little bit about me, and then some other details as well. Now, I'm going to start with two or three questions that I'm frequently asked, either by guests, friends, or listeners. All of these questions, these FAQs, I've probably heard like 10 times or more. So hopefully now people can have this reference. But then after this, we'll get to some of my listener suggested questions. The first one being, do you read or watch every story that you talk about? This kind of makes me feel a little bit guilty. I mean, if you listen to my show, you probably can guess that I don't. Just from the number of times that I've admitted my unfamiliarity with this subject matter. I do try to research the stories that come onto the show for every interview. So I'll read a summary myself to find out some basic information so that I can ask better questions for each episode. I think I've probably watched or read based on the last season. I was familiar already before the shows with about half of the stories we talked about. So like 21 out of 43. And that's not counting Takes episodes. And sometimes I will read or watch something after an episode, although my reading list and watch lists are extremely long. So I don't often get around to them in a timely manner, unfortunately. A second question that I get asked a lot is, what does it mean to be a tale of our time? And why did I pick that as the title of my show? So I picked Tales of Our Time as a title because I had heard it used to describe stories often, but not necessarily as a defined thing. Personally, I think it's a really flexible term, and that's why I really like it. If I were to get artsy with it, I would say that while it's kind of self-explanatory, I feel like there's a lot of room and to add nuance to it. And I feel like every person and every story fills in that nuance by themselves. Another way to put that would be that I find it to be a term better described by what it isn't. And like what I mean by that is that I often hear my guests in my show in our cold open say something along the lines of, a tale of our time shouldn't be, or it wouldn't be like this. And then on a shorter reason, like it's snappy, I think it sounds really nice. So that's why I picked that. One final question that I get, do you read a lot? And something that I'm asked a lot. But long-term listeners know the answer to this is probably also no. I used to read a lot when I was in high school, but now a lot of my reading is done on audiobooks. So if I count audiobooks, I do read a lot. I guess I should say that I listen a lot. I used to listen to a lot of audiobooks on Spotify. Right now I'm looking for another way to do that. But physically reading, no, I don't really do that a lot anymore. But I do listen to a lot of books and podcasts all the time. So that's where a lot of my personal reading comes in. And that's all for the FAQs. So now I'm going to transition into some listener submitted questions. These are presented in no particular order, and I'll only name names where I was given permission to do so. So first up is a question that I get a lot from a lot of people, but I was asked this specifically for this episode by Ching En, which is, what brought you to Taiwan? Now, I don't know if I've said this on another show before, but I actually moved to Taiwan when I was 21. 9 years ago now, or so you can do the math, but I right out of college. And so at that time I was working with foreign exchange students, and I had been interested in doing that and in that kind of in working in an international community for a long time. So I knew that I wanted to move abroad when I graduated college. And actually there was a company, an English teaching company, that came to my school looking to recruit teachers in the last year that I was in school. So during that year, I talked to the company that I eventually came here to work for. And 6 months later, and like 1 month later, I signed on to a job with them that started in that fall. And then about 6 months, I think 4 to 6 months, I flew out to Taiwan, still 21, for that job. My initial thought had been that I would live in Taiwan for at least 2 years, 1 year to get accustomed to it, and then 1 year to kind of like really enjoy living in Taiwan and explore a little bit more. But that clearly has ballooned out into much more. I really enjoyed being here. So that's the first question. It dovetails nicely into the second question, which was asked by my friend Kelly in Japan. And that question was, what's your favorite thing about living in Taiwan? The first answer is not super interesting, and that would be like the affordability of it compared to the United States. So I know that can't be said for everyone, but at least comparing prices to where I came from in the United States, and I'm talking mostly about things like healthcare, owning a vehicle, insurance. Those things are much easier to access in Taiwan than they are in the United States, where I grew up in Seattle. I guess that's more of like a negative reflection on the U.S. So a second reason I would say is like the public transportation. Because if you've never been to the U.S., there's nothing like a lot of big cities don't have train systems. And at least Seattle didn't have any. And we have a really good ferry system, but it's not one of those things that most people use every day. So it wasn't very helpful on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's something I really appreciate about Taiwan is the MRT, the train systems, the buses. There's just a lot more kind of like public infrastructure for getting around. Those are kind of boring. I guess the third reason, like a third reason I really like it is I think you meet a lot of interesting people here. I think that maybe that's more of a Taipei thing. People in other parts of the country, in Taiwan, you can call me, tell me if this is the same for you. But I think that since Taipei is such like a big airport hub, and the foreigner community, in my experience, is pretty small and tight-knit. So it's really easy to meet a lot of very interesting people who are quite different from you. And I think that that's really helped broaden my views. It's something that I'm really grateful for is, like the broader international community. So a little bit boring would be the affordability, the public transportation, and on a more personal note, it's a lot of the international people that I have met here. Those are some of my favorite things about living in Taiwan. So moving from that into some questions about the show, I think the first question I want to start with is from Emily in Washington. And she said, what have you learned the most or discovered about yourself while doing this show, while doing Tales of Our Time? So this question is kind of hard for me to answer. I've learned a lot, like literally I've learned a lot more about how to be a better interviewer and the style of interviewing on my show that I prefer. I guess I can say that I also learned a lot about my own personal speech patterns from spending so much time listening back to the show. Like, I edit my voice every day. So you learn really quickly, and it's kind of uncomfortable at first, but like you learn what your own verbal tells are, the things that you say often and you don't really think about, and more of how you sound to others. So like, I want to give an example, but I'm kind of like a little self-conscious. I feel like if I do that, then you will all start to hear them. But what I can say is that they weren't all things that I thought. So like there are words I know that I say a lot, and then there were words and phrases that surprised me, and I didn't know that I used them so often. So that like I learned a lot more about my own personal speech patterns while doing this show. And I guess in a way that's also helped me be more confident because I know for sure what I sound like. And that's for some people that's intimidating. I think it has also been really nice for me to just have that knowledge. So thank you, Emily. Then to another in-house one. I really liked, I got a question from Sharon Lynn here at RTI who asked me, for screen adaptations, which actor do you think always makes whatever they're in better? And this question, I said the last question was hard for me to answer. This question is kind of doubly hard for me because a little known fact is I'm rotten at remembering actor and actresses' names. Like I have to look them up in every movie that I watch. I can remember the characters that they play usually, but not like the actual person who played them. So I tried to come extra prepared for this one. The two actors that came to mind were Oscar Isaac and Margot Robbie. And they're both recent because, like I said, I have trouble trawling through my memories to like pick out exact actors in a story that I've seen. But like what I can say is like every time, starting with Oscar Isaac, every time that I see him, I'm really excited to see like every time that he pops up in a movie. And I think his performances are very captivating. The same thing I think can be said for Margot Robbie. I feel like she often gets cast because she's really pretty, but something that I think she's also just a very talented actress. I think her characters have a lot of personality to them. Like both of these actors, I guess I could say, are very good at embodying the characters that they're acting. And so in that way, they elevate the movies for me. They make them a memorable experience. So Margot Robbie and Oscar Isaac. Thanks, Sharon. So moving on to another one from Taiwan. This is from my friend Tarn, who asked, how did you learn so much about Japanese horror tales? And now I think that I talked a lot more about this on Michelle Chang's show, Geek Out. But this is like another passion of mine. I really like the horror genre in general, especially for movies and games. How I learned about Japanese horror, something that kind of drew me to it was I feel like, how to say this? Like, I think a lot of like Japanese mythology or mythos has a really good ecosystem to it. Like things fit very well together, which is really satisfying to watch or listen to. And so the outlet for me getting into that was through video games, so through Japanese video games when I was in college. And then I actually just kind of started studying it. One of my fields of study was fairy tales, and through that, urban legends. And some resources that I used to study, mostly for me, starting by studying specific like ghosts or demons or entities. One of those resources I used is, you can find it yourself now, it's yokai.com. It's very good. All the stuff there is by a man named Matthew Meyer, but he seemed to be really informed on it. And it's free online, though he has several books that I would also highly recommend. And kind of like the stories came from trying to learn about creatures, kind of like an anchoring creature. Like if you learn about Dracula, you'll learn about vampire mythos, kind of that kind of thing. So that was like a really big entry point for me. And then I guess like the less exciting answer is it's just been compounding years of study, because I find that ecosystem of storytelling very tight knit. So I really like that. And then also I really like the horror genre. So those two things combined. And now I think especially that I'm living in East Asia, that kind of all compounded into this being something that I study a lot in my free time for fun. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you for asking it. It's a very fun question for me to kind of like dig into. And I hope you guys go check out that website. There are a couple of other books, but I didn't really come prepared with those names. So give it a shot. Thank you, Tarn, for asking that one. So I think we're going to have to close out the listener section of the mailbag episode today with I'm gonna combine two questions. They're really similar. So I was asked this question by someone in Seattle, by my dad in Seattle, Rob, and also a friend here at RTI. They both asked me what has been a favorite or most interesting session of my podcast. Another way that Marianne phrased it was having done so many interviews, talking about like their people's most influential stories. Which ones have I like looked at personally, or which ones did I find most meaningful? And that but kind of putting those two together, one thing that I started the show because I really like talking about stories with other people. It's hard to pick a favorite of mine. I can say like some of the stories that have gotten me like most excited, starting with ones that I haven't talked about, I guess, or I hadn't explored before the show. One of them would be the Little Prince episode that I did with Kyle, my friend here in Taiwan. That one, the conversation just got to a point where I found it really meaningful. And I really like when people can extrapolate meaning from something that looks simple, because I think like meaning is made. And so I really like seeing that done. I like participating in that with people. Another episode is one that I did very recently with my friend Kat on the book S, just because I think like that area of media is also something that is really interesting to me. It's something that I studied, but it's hard to study because it's very different. And I think for both of the, like for very different reasons, S I think is really doing a lot of very interesting things, and I find it to be a very fascinating way to write a book. The episode on the Little Prince itself, I think a lot of people are familiar with it, but I liked discussing it in that area, in the view of something that looks simple but can mean a lot. And I think that also kind of gets to a heart of like something I wanted to do with this show. So that episode is really meaningful to me. And the last episode I say would be the Taz Balance tribute episode. That was like one of the first episodes I did that was very near and dear to my heart. Different from the other two, though, that was a story that I had listened to. So I really wanted to try to get across to people who hadn't experienced it yet what made that show so meaningful to me and to like a huge number of people that I personally know. So I guess that's 3 episodes. Those are 3 episodes, 3 stories. The Adventure Zone Balance Arc, that's a podcast. The Little Prince book, and then that episode that I did. And then more recently, the episode on S, which is a book that I would recommend many people go check out. That's written by Doug Dorst. So thank you, Mary Ann and Dad, thank you, Rob, for asking me that question. And unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for today. I just want to say thank you to everyone for sending in your questions. I hope I was able to answer them to the best of my ability. But also thank you everyone again, like from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for listening for the last year. I'm really grateful to all of you, especially there was that period where your feedback meant a lot to me. And I cannot stress that enough. It's the reason that my show was able to keep going. And in the future, like it's a reason why I keep doing this, as I like interacting with you guys. And I want to make sure that this is a story or not a story, but a podcast that you feel like you can interact with as well. So please, if you have any questions about me, about stories, if you have stories to suggest, you can send those to me. I love to receive them. You can email me. My information is on rti.com. But if you're listening now, you can also email me at Stephia, STEPHEA @rti.org.tw. And I'm happy to receive those. I would love to respond to those as we keep going, moving into our 2nd season. So thank you all for listening. We'll get back to our regular episodes next week. And I hope that you guys are really looking forward to the 2nd season of Tales of Our Time. I'm really looking forward to bringing it to you and the conversations that we can have together about stories that move us. So, as always, I'll see you next time.